Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 15 of the 2024 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And it's been only a little over a week since the College Football Playoff National Championship, and, well, I got that one wrong. And who in their right mind is going to bet against Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines? Who's got it better than them? Obviously nobody. They are the national champs, 34-13 winners. And I think, honestly, what got me sold on Washington really was the play of Michael Penix Jr. against Texas. When you look at a defense like Michigan and the front that they had, expecting Mason Graham, expecting Chris Jenkins, Kenneth Grant to apply pressure up front, I was expecting Penix Jr. to do a lot of what he did against Texas. We talked about the fact that Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy were able to get pressure, and he was able to sidestep that rush, manipulate the pocket, something that he really hadn't been able to do or really showcase because he was playing behind the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line. And frankly, he picked the worst time to have maybe his worst game yet. 27-51, 255 yards, just one touchdown, but two interceptions. And that was really, I think, the key to the game was Michigan being able to put pressure on Michael Penix Jr., making him uncomfortable the entire game. The fact that Dylan Johnson couldn't really get anything going, that running game was virtually non-existent. So really, that they could bear down on Michael Penix Jr. We still saw him make some plays. We're going to talk about that here. But, Michigan, look, that front, they've got 6-7 guys that are going to be playing in the NFL in the next couple of years. That's just a dominant front. Michigan offensively, they weren't spectacular. Really what it was Blake Corum and that offensive line going to work. JJ McCarthy, that's one of the things that, he only completed 10 passes, 10 of 18 for 140 yards. I really left that game having more questions than anything else with JJ McCarthy. Is this a guy that you feel comfortable putting the ball in his hand at the next level when really Michigan, when it counted in that game, the ball really went to the running game. The ball was not in his hands. He was not asked to do a whole lot in this game. It was really focused on that running game, focused on Blake Corum, and there were times where McCarthy did hit an open receiver, but also left a lot out there on the field as well. So we're going to take a look at all of the draft eligible prospects because that's what we do. Obviously, we know that the CFP National Championship, it's already said and done, but this is what this podcast is all about. It's taking a look at the draft eligible prospects and really breaking them down. What did we see in the game? What does that mean for them? Really, where do we see these guys trending after this game as they go into the pre-draft process, which is really what we're in right now. And, I think really what we have to do first is take a look at Washington when they were on offense and talk about Michael Penix Jr. I think that's really the hot topic, if you will, coming out of that game. And really with Michael Penix Jr. against Texas, again, like I said, he was able to manipulate the pocket. He was able to sidestep the rush, reset his feet, and fire darts down the field. What you saw against Michigan was a very uncomfortable Michael Penix Jr. This is the first time that any team was able to put consistent pressure throughout the entire game. He was seeing Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins coming up the middle along with Kenneth Grant. I was worried about Nate Kalepo, Jordan Brailsford, Julius Buelow on the interior of that line going against these guys, and frankly, it really showed that they were overmatched. Braden McGregor didn't really get to do a whole lot when he saw, really none of these guys did, whether it was him, whether it was Josiah Stewart, Cam Good, Derek Moore, Jalen Harrell. None of those guys really wanted to line up over Troy Fautanu. A couple of guys got in, and made some pressures, but for the most part, did his job. McGregor didn't really record any stats, but you saw the pressures. You saw him making Michael Penix Jr. uncomfortable. Same with Jalen Harrell, drawing multiple holding calls against Roger Rosengart in the right tackle. And so, plus Mikey Sane was still coming off the edge, and Josiah Stewart making the pressures. but really it was coming right up the middle. And that's one of the things that you were expecting to see Michael Penix Jr. Can you sidestep that rush and go? And we just didn't see that. And when he was asked to make plays on the move, he looked very pedestrian. Michael Penix Jr. is at his best when he's able to make a move and then reset his feet and fire those darts. And when he's on the move like that, trying to throw without setting his feet, man, he was throwing behind receivers, he was sailing and throwing over guys. Michael Penix Jr. under pressure is not a pretty picture right now. And it's one of those things, I've talked about that early on, and I drank the Kool-Aid against Texas because I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe he's finally shown it. Kind of like C.J. Stroud. We were talking about him last year, Ohio State against Georgia. We finally got to see C.J. Stroud beat you with his legs. And I was like, all right, we've seen enough. Can Michael Penix Jr. do it? Sure. But here's the thing. This was the first time he actually saw consistent pressure. Texas, there wasn't consistent pressure. When he did have it, it was coming right up the middle, and he was able to make a quick move and sidestep Byron Murphy. When you've got Mason Graham and Chris Jenk, all these guys coming at you play after play after play, you could tell that Penix Jr. was rattled. And here's the thing. He is, Jesse Minter, I think, also deserves a lot of credit because he was throwing a lot of different looks at him. Guys were covered and not always open. And, there were some blown coverages, and Michael Penix just didn't see guys. Obviously, a lot of that was due to the pressure. Had, Devin Culp, running wide open. Missed that. There was a missed throw, to Rome Odunze, who was just looking to get vertical, and I think he was expecting him to take the ball to the outside or take the route to the outside, and was trying to throw it away from the defender. Rome Odunze was just getting vertical, and the miscommunication there. But we know, and Jesse Minter even talked about, that's Michigan's defensive coordinator, that Michael Penix Jr. He's an elite processor. You see his brain work quickly, and there's a lot of talk about UW's one read offense at times. But what I saw, especially down in that goal line where the 3-yard touchdown, you saw him look to the right, and Rome Odunze gets held by Will Johnson. Not only does he see that, he points it out, and then comes back to his left. Jalen McMillan wins on a slant route and puts the ball, literally finds the receiver, and the ball's out in no time flat. I'd have to actually try to time it to see what the exact reaction time was there. But you saw him come off the initial, sees the hole, points it out, and then comes right back and fires a strike to Jalen McMillan. He's a guy that, he understands where to go with the football. He and Bo Nix both are exceptional at that. But it's one of those things with Penix was, he would read, he read the safety on one, adjusts to the motion, covering the middle of the field, goes back deep. Jalen Polk wide open up the seam, puts the ball right on him on a curl route for a 17-yard gain as well. And look, when he had the clean pocket, man, he was able to step right in, hits Rome Odunze, drops the ball right over his shoulder, and it was a 32-yard gain that was called back due to a hold. What's crazy is that Rome Odunze had a couple of big plays that were called back because of holding plays, beat Will Johnson, who was ultimately named the defensive player of the game. We'll get to that here in a minute. Against Texas, he was 5 of 7 on throws of with 20+ air yards, 10 off-platform completions. Both were season highs, and so that's really one of the things that you looked at and said, man, this is going to be the game for Penix Jr., and it just never came to fruition. And that's, I think, part of what was so frustrating was, it's one of those things to where he can do it, but can he do it consistently? We know what Caleb Williams can do under pressure. We've seen it time and time again there at USC. He was running for his life a lot of times. That offensive line just not giving him a whole lot of time, and he was still able to produce. Drake May, the same thing. Offensive line was not very good. And to a lesser extent, Jaden Daniels playing behind that LSU offensive line. He did not have the luxury of playing behind Joe Moore Award level offensive lines. Michigan, Washington, Oregon, all of those teams have had offensive lines finalists for the Joe Moore Award, right? And JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, are any of them first-round quarterbacks? You can go through, study the tape, and talk about them and find a lot of the positives. But I came out of this game saying, any chance of Michael Penix Jr. as a top 10 quarterback, out the window. There's just no way. Can he throw the ball? Absolutely. But you put him under pressure, and is he going to be able to have that short drop, find the hot receiver, and deliver those short to intermediate throws? We know we can throw the deep ball. The deep ball is going to be there all day. The throws into the flat, we've seen those. But can he, when he's under that consistent pressure, that short drop, hang in there and deliver that strike? I don't know that he's going to be able to do that. I think really he's going to need a team that's not completely rebuilding. I look at a team like Atlanta, look at a team like Minnesota, even Seattle, depending on what happens with Geno Smith. Teams that they're building around. You look at the offensive line; they've got a lot of talent at the skill position, and they're really looking for a quarterback as kind of that final piece. Michael Penix Jr. is not a first-round quarterback, in my opinion. I think this is a guy that's still going to go in the top 50. I think he's still probably my number 4 quarterback, although I think Bo Nix is charging. JJ McCarthy, to me, has dropped in this group as well. But look, he faced consistent pressure earlier in the season as well. 50% of his pressures came in, against Oregon, Arizona State, and Stanford. And when you look at those 3 games at the beginning of, in the middle of the season, in October, 2 games where his completion percentage was under 60%, and he threw 4 interceptions in those games. Arizona State, he only threw for 275 yards. That's one of the lower totals that we saw from him. Oregon State, tough defense, 162 yards and a couple of scores. In that game, only completed 46.4% of his passes. So you put him under pressure, and he's a guy that I think he can't do the improvisation that a lot of the other guys have. You throw that in. You've got the injuries to go along with it. Yes, he's had the 2 years, and I said this on the last podcast, and I tried to make it as an argument, but who am I kidding? 4 years in a row in Indiana with season-ending injuries, 2 AC joint issues, and then 2 ACL tears. Yes, he was at UW and 2 straight seasons without any injuries, but 4 season-ending injuries. I mean, man, you want to take that in round number 1? I mean, you're really gambling. Are there guys? Look, Anthony Munoz tore his knee 3 times at USC, and look, the dude still ended up being a Hall of Famer. But you're talking about very few times you're going to see that happen. Terry Allen was a 1,000-yard rusher after tearing both an ACL on his left knee and then an ACL on the right knee. So there are success stories when you're talking about injuries. But Michael Penix Jr., look, he's also going to be 24 years of age going into the league. So he's going to be an older prospect. There are a lot of question marks. So I think if I'm a team. Look, if I'm Atlanta, sitting there at number 8, I seriously consider, getting on the phone, talking to Chicago. What are you doing with Justin Fields? Are you keeping Justin Fields, or are you looking to trade that number 1 overall pick? I don't see Chicago trading all the way down to number 8. I think you're probably going to see like a team like Washington trade up, get the hometown kid, Caleb Williams. But then, I think with the Bears, ultimately that means that a quarterback's off the table. Maybe Atlanta is able to get Jaden Daniels at that point. I think it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. Penix Jr., I think, like I said, Minnesota in the second round would make a lot of sense. But this was just a game that I thought he was exposed, and I really worry about him at the next level. He's got to be in the right situation. I think a lot of these quarterbacks, they've got to be in the right situation. I talked about Rome Odunze. Ended up with 5 catches. 87 yards on the day. And, Odunze was going up against Will Johnson, who's going to be a first-round pick in next year's draft. I think he'll be one of the top corners. And, Odunze, he and Penix Jr. struggled to get on the same page. You saw him get really anxious coming off the line. He was one-on-one against Josh Wallace and stumbled coming out of the blocks. But man, he ran an out and up on the outside, was able to get inside leverage on Will Johnson, forced a hold. Mentioned that move there, really coming off the line, and another hold by Will Johnson. And look, Michael Penix Jr. even threw a ball underthrown, was able to work his way back to the ball, did a great job tracking it, and ultimately another defensive pass interference by Will Johnson. But a couple of those plays, again, called back due to penalties. 44-yard gain on a busted play, got vertical, ball thrown a little short, able to still haul the ball in, and cut inside the DB. He's going to make you pay. That's really the thing, is one-on-one. You saw the physicality. You saw his ability to separate. It was on the outside versus Will Johnson. Shows a sluggo, plants to the inside, gets vertical, runs by him, tracks the ball over his shoulder like I was talking about, catching the ball in the bucket at 38, goes out of bounds at the 35 for a gain of 32. That was called back due to a hold. So, I mean, there were a lot of plays where Will Johnson, the defensive player of the game, yes, he has the interception to start off the third quarter. I think Mason Graham had a bigger impact. Mikey Sainristil still should have been the guy, though. 8 tackles, that interception that really sealed the deal. I was really surprised that Will Johnson was ultimately the guy that they were handing this trophy to when it was all came down to it. But Rome Odunze, I think there's no question. You see the speed, you see the strength. 6'3", 215. He's going to be either the second or third receiver taken in this year's draft. He'll be a top 10 pick. And really the question mark is just how high is he going to come off the board? That's really a big question mark right now. And I think there are a lot of different teams that could use his services there at the top of the draft. And I think that's what makes it so interesting is obviously Arizona is going to be a team that's going to be looking for a wideout. If Chicago doesn't go quarterback, then I think they may look to trade it to number 2 or number 3 with Washington and New England, and still look to get Marvin Harrison Jr. Then Cardinals are going to take either Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze, which then leaves Rome Odunze right there at number 6 overall. To the Giants. Rome Odunze, could he fall to number 9 to the Bears? That's always a possibility as well. The Chargers sitting there at 5. I think Brock Bowers will be a great pick for them. But you could also see them taking either Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze, so it's going to really be interesting to see exactly where he goes. But he is absolutely a top 10 pick. Jalen Polk, look, 6'2", 204. This is a guy that does a really good job sinking his hips. For a guy who's 6'2", sinks his hips. There was a comeback on that curl route, as I mentioned. Ball was a little high, able to extend, pluck the ball for a 17-yard gain. Caught a screen, showed really good acceleration down the field for 16 yards, had 4 catches for 37 yards. Polk, to me, is a guy that I think could be a day 2 pick. I think there are a lot of guys at that receiver position. He'll probably be a 3rd rounder, it would be my guess. Jalen McMillan is a guy that I think everyone was expecting to have a huge year as a slot guy. I was thinking 3rd round. He's probably going to be somewhere in that 3rd, 4th, 5th round. I'd be really surprised if he didn't fall to the 5th. But you see his ability to win off the line of scrimmage. Perfect secondary option, and a guy that before the injury was kind of a security blanket for Penix. 6'1", 186. Look, all 3 of these receivers are going to be coming into the draft. Could they all end up coming off the board in the first 2 days of the draft? Absolutely. Jack Westover, 5 catches, 42 yards. This is a guy that people aren't really talking about. I think Westover has a great chance to get drafted. He's very versatile, can do a lot of different things. He could be he could be a fullback if you wanted him to. H-back, tight end, 6'3", 248, doesn't have the biggest size, but he's a guy that's going to end up playing at the next level. Former walk-on, played very little football in high school. Battled a calf injury during the season, but you never really knew that. You watched him as a blocker, kept the hands inside on Mikey Sainristil, still allowing Jalen McMillan to get outside on a jet sweep for a gain of 9 yards. Excellent block on the perimeter on Will Johnson on a screen play for Rome Odunze, allowing him to bounce it to the outside for a gain of 8 yards. Good route runner, excellent hands, can plant, get up the field. he's not the most sudden guy by any means, but a guy that could just get the job done. So really a lot of nice weapons there for Penix Jr. And then I mentioned the offensive line. Troy Fautanu, clearly, this is a guy that's going to be a first-round pick. I think, either the late teens or early 20s is probably that range, that sweet spot for Fautanu. Athleticism on display on a screen in the flat to Odunze, 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. He gets to the second level on the perimeter, seals off the linebacker Michael Barrett. Odunze cutting outside for a pickup of 16 yards. You saw the kick slide. Derek Moore stays balanced, low pad level as he's moving with him. And really, Derek Moore is trying to attack him up high with the bull rush and trying to really out-muscle him. And Fautanu keeps that low center of gravity, keeps that low base, able to anchor and drive into him and really set that base, and was not moved off of his point, wasn't moved back at all. You saw him be physical with his hands to swipe at Mason Graham and throw him off his rush. Just really, there was another play where he strikes Derek Moore, extends his right arm into the inside pad level, controls him coming off the edge. You saw really good footwork as well, sliding with Braden McGregor, sinks those hips there as well, kept him in front. So I thought Troy Fautanu absolutely helped him. 6'4", 312. He'll be a first rounder for sure. But Roger Rosengarten, I thought, this was the game where his foot speed was really exposed, or lack thereof. It's one of those things to where, Rosengarten, he's got good length. He's 6'6", 300. He'll be a right tackle at the next level. But I think he's one of those guys, you're looking at anywhere between the fifth and sixth round, more than likely. But I think, he was so slow out of his stance against Derek Moore, beat him with speed. He was really left lunging, leaning, wasn't able to recover. Beaten badly by Braden McGregor on an out-and-up move. Really overset and crossover. Ultimately got called for a hold. It was kind of a weak holding call on that 32-yard pass play to Rome Odunze, but still, shouldn't have even put himself in that situation. He was also beaten by Jalen Harrell on the fourth down play that I mentioned, that Will Johnson had the defensive pass interference, and he was just slow to react out of his stance. I mean, basically had to just grab him as he was going by. So it's one of those things to where, Rosengarten, look, Rob Havenstein came from Wisconsin. I thought that, he was kind of heavy-footed when he was coming at it, as a Badger, and he's carved a nice career for himself. Rosengarten, can generate a lot of movement in the running game. I've seen him, with his kick slide and then take that defensive end, extending into him and then riding him away from the play. I think he needs to get a little bit stronger, and also needs to work on that quickness coming out of his stance and really getting with an NFL O-line coach, because I thought he was definitely exposed in this game. I think he will be a day 3 guy. He's one of those guys to keep an eye on, because I still think the kid can play. But granted, McGregor, Harrell, those are guys that are going to be playing on Sunday as well. Rosengarten, the question with the foot speed, is he a guy that you're ultimately have to kick inside to guard? Because if that's the case, if ultimately he's not a guy that you're going to be playing a tackle, I think that's going to affect his overall draft stock. So Washington, we kind of broke them down, took a look at things. Dylan Johnson really couldn't get anything going. I think you can talk about his toughness. That's really the biggest thing that you can say for this kid. A guy that's battled a foot injury the entire year. The bursa sack, tears the bursa sack in his knee in the semifinal there against Texas. Having issues with his other ankle, and 11 carries, 33 yards. Had a couple of catches for 24 yards. He wasn't his explosive self, and yet this guy was physical. He was a guy, he's at his best, outside, with a zone team, puts his foot in the ground, gets downhill, and really just wants to be physical. He's a pretty good pass catcher as well. This is just a guy, he's going to be a grinder for you. He's going to be a late day 3 guy, I think, but, I was just impressed with his ability to deal with that pain. He just wasn't himself. So Washington, to take any of that pressure off Michael Penix Jr., that constant pressure, there was no fear of the run game. Tybo Rogers, Will Nixon were not much of a factor. I was really surprised because I thought Tybo Rogers had a couple of really nice carries in the Texas game. I like his athleticism. I thought he was going to be much more of a factor than he actually was. And so, that was a huge difference maker there, I thought, with Washington's offense and Michigan really being able to tee off on Michael Penix Jr. Now, Michigan, I mentioned all these guys on this team, and Mason Graham is a kid. He's not going to be in this year's draft. He's a true sophomore. And what's crazy is he went to Servite, same school as Noah Fafita and Teteroa McMillan. Then the tight end, Burnett, they're at Arizona. My question is, they're at U of A. They hire Brent Brennan as the head coach coming down from San Jose State, but Jed Fish moves on to Washington. The way that was handled, was there any conversation? It sounds like he went in, let the team know, and was basically in and out. So how many guys could really be on the move to Washington? Did he burn bridges there? If I'm Mason Graham, I'm at least getting on the phone and having a conversation with Noah Fafita, Teteroa McMillan, Keon Burnett, saying, hey, let's reunite the Servite Friars in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I mean, I'm just saying, does he have that kind of pull with his boys? But man, Mason Graham is so physical at the point of attack. This is a guy I look at the impact that he made in this bowl game, and really against Alabama as well as the defensive player of the game. Just the bull rush. I mean, he was just flattening the right guard, Julius Buelow, forcing Penix to flee the pocket. Then he lines up over Nate Coleppo, and they're pulling, looking to block, able to use his hands to get off the block. Quick burst down the line of scrimmage to drop Dylan Johnson for no gain. This is a guy, to me, when I look at guys at the defensive tackle position with the real quick get off, guys that are looking to be a quick penetrator, getting into the backfield and being effective against both the run and the pass, I think of guys like Brian Bresee and Mason Graham. To me, is a guy that I think we have to watch out for as a potential first round pick. He was dominant yet again, and that's why he's a guy, a name to watch out for in the 2024 draft for sure. Now, Chris Jenkins, 6'3", 305. We know the bloodlines there. Dad played for the Carolina Panthers. This is a dude who, against Alabama, you want to talk about how strong J.C. Latham is. He grabbed a hold of Chris Jenkins and turned him to the outside, basically threw him, and just kind of kept him there on the ground. Just threw him to the outside, opened up this huge hole for Jace McClellan on a 34-yard touchdown. But then in this game, speed was all the difference. Lines up against the right guard, Julius Buelow. Poor Buelow, just getting picked on. Shows a quick move first, attacking the outside shoulder, spin move back to the inside as he was leaning, put him out of position, then the burst to close on Penix to force a throwaway. Also did a really good job holding the point with excellent leverage, extending his right hand into the left shoulder pad of the left guard, Nate Coleppo. Got low, really, really low, and then disposed of him and wrapped up Will Nixon after just a short gain. So you saw his ability to, anchor and set the edge against the run, playing with excellent leverage. And then you also saw his ability, the speed and quickness to affect the passing game. So that versatility, this is a guy who's going to be a day 2 pick. And I think this game just only solidified that fact, watching his ability to continue to make those plays. Braden McGregor, I mentioned him. This is going to be a day 3 guy. But this is a guy that's going to come out there and work his butt off. He's physical. He's 6'6", 267. I think he's a guy who ultimately his home is probably going to be as a 5 technique in a 34 defense. I think that's where he could probably excel. Struggled against Troy Fautanu, but was able to take advantage of the lack of foot speed by Roger Rosengarten, as I mentioned. Quickness off the ball, like I mentioned on that out and up. Just a jab step on the outside. Right tackle oversets, able to use a quick arm over, beats him to the inside, pressures Michael Penix in the pocket, uses that length to overpower his blockers as well. A lot more bull rush than finesse. Jalen Harrell is more of the finesse guy on the opposite side. I think Harrell is another guy that day 3 is probably where it feels right for him. Kenneth Grant. I mentioned Mason Graham. Now, Jenkins is leaving, but Kenneth Grant's going to be on that line as well. He had a sack. And when you're talking about a guy who's 340 pounds, moving the way that he did in that game, it was ridiculous. I mean, he's getting into the backfield, chasing down Michael Penix Jr. He really didn't have anywhere to go. How do you sidestep a guy like that? The quickness coming off the football, he's going to be a guy to watch in next year's draft, as is Josiah Stewart. Look, Josiah Stewart, yes, he's undersized, 6'1", 245, but he's got a really quick get-off. Came over from Coastal Carolina, was kind of a role player, but he's stepped up, played really well. A guy that could set the edge at times. Got up the field, took on the block of the pulling guard, Nate Kalepo. Nearly able to drop the running back Dylan Johnson for a loss, but he really blew up that play, allowed Junior Colson to work inside out to really drop the running back. He announced he's coming back for his senior season. So when you look at it, you're losing McGregor, Jenkins, and Harrell, but you're able to then fill in with Grant and Stewart. And I think Derek Moore will probably be that other defensive end there for that group. So they're in good hands overall. Junior Colson, this is a guy that I think is going to be probably an early day 3 guy. 6'3", 247, leading tackler for the team. Was playing with a cast on one hand, a club on the other. 3-year starter. This is a guy that's just hard-nosed, physical defender. I mentioned that, the instincts, getting outside, chasing down Dylan Johnson on that play where Josiah Stewart got that early penetration up the field, understood what was going on, able to make a beeline, drop the running back in space. He showed the ability, in coverage to pick up defenders. Pick up route runners coming over the middle as well. I think watching his fluidity in coverage is going to be a big question mark for me. I want to see what he can do. I know what he can do as a blitzer. I know what he can do covering the field sideline to sideline. What can he do dropping into coverage? That's something that I'm going to want to see in any of the all-star games that he's invited to, and then especially at the combine to really see exactly where he's going to go. I still have him as my number 3 linebacker, inside linebacker, off-ball linebacker, whatever you want to call him. And Colson, early day, day 3, could he sneak into that 3rd round? I think it's always possible. The linebacker position, we saw last year guys that we were expecting to come off the board much earlier in Drew Sanders and Trenton Simpson ultimately came off the board in the 3rd round. So Colson, 3rd, 4th, probably feels about right. But how about Mikey Sainristil? This is a guy came to Michigan as a receiver, right? And he moved over to the defensive side of the football, and he's really made an impact since he made that move. This is a guy that's basically been a nickel. He missed 4 tackles against against Alabama. And then he shows up in this game, and it was an early play, 3rd and 5, quick throw to the line of scrimmage to Jalen McMillan in the slot. Drove on it, able to wrap him up. McMillan tries to spin away, but he's able to drop him for just a 1-yard gain. You saw the physicality, wrapping up well, doesn't really allow any yards after catch. Very reliable tackler. So that Alabama game was an anomaly, and you saw him really take it personally in this game. Ran right with Jalen McMillan on a wheel from the slot. He kind of showed an out and then gets vertical, and took away the angle for a throw while in phase, just down that sideline. Really made it difficult for Michael Penix Jr. Ultimately ends up overthrowing the play. And then on a 4th and 13 from the Michigan 30, Jalen McMillan runs a crossing route. Penix Jr. sails the pass. He was sitting in the zone, makes the pick, takes off down the field for an 81-yard gain, sets up 1st and goal on the final touchdown by Michigan. Sainristil finished the game, as I said, 8 tackles and that interception for 81 yards. He's a leader on that defense. To me, he's one of those guys to where, I think he's going to get drafted much higher than a lot of people think. Could he be, he could even be a guy that could be taken in round number 2. He's one of those guys, a high character guy. He's one of those guys that, as a receiver, I think he takes that receiver mentality to the defensive side of the football. You watch his ability to read the routes, understand what the quarterback wants to do with the football, understand what the receiver is going to do with the routes, and he puts himself in a position to make a play. You love his ability to blitz coming off the edge. You love his ability sticking his nose in the running game as well and run support. And, why wouldn't you, as a team, as an NFL franchise, not want this guy on your team? You want this guy on your team. You want to get him on the field as quickly as possible. I don't think he gets past day 2. And I think there's a chance we can even see Mikey Sainristil coming off the board in round number 2, just because of everything that he does on the football field, for the Michigan Wolverines. Now, when Michigan had the football in this game, let's talk about JJ McCarthy, shall we? As I mentioned, 10 of 18, 140 yards, had 4 carries for 31 yards. And I think, a lot of what we saw here wasn't so much, what JJ McCarthy did, but a lot of it was what he didn't do or wasn't asked to do. A lot of times when, a big play was needed, you saw Blake Corum, you saw Donovan Edwards, you saw a lot of these other guys stepping up and making plays. And the question is you've got the Big Ten quarterback of the year. He's 26-1, now 27-1 as a starting quarterback. But the ball wasn't always in his hands when you needed that big play. And that really, I know Michigan's identity is running the football, but it still makes you wonder, why is this team not going through JJ McCarthy? Why aren't they asking him to do more? And you see the talent, you see his ability. The nose tackle, Latuli Nasanua, got after him after he drops back, forced him to backpedal, rolled to his left away from that pressure. Cornelius Johnson comes on a comeback route, put the ball to the outside. Ultimately, the ball was a little bit too far to the inside. Cornelius Johnson able to extend for the ball behind him and hauled it in going down. He was fading towards the sideline as he threw it. Didn't really get the hips turned around to drive the football to the outside. But you saw the athleticism. You saw his ability to make a play, extend the play. So you do like that. Clean pocket on a 2nd and 7 from the 17. Roman Wilson running a crossing route. Patient, allowing him to come across the field. Hits him as he gets outside the safety, Dominique Hampton. Wilson ultimately forced out at the 45 for a gain of 38. Hampton came down expecting a run. You saw the quarterback, McCarthy, throw over the top. Accurate pass. You're reading the defense. So you like to see that. Pressure coming. Rolling out to buy time. Finds the tight end, Colson Loveland, on a comeback. Puts the ball on the outside. Ultimately, Loveland wasn't able to haul it in. Dominique Hampton was contesting the catch right there along the sideline, but you put the ball right on his tight end, which is what you want to see. But there was 3rd and 10. I think it was the same drive. Pressure coming from the linebackers. Needed to get it out quickly. Has Cornelius Johnson on a stop route. Threw the ball way too high. Ended up with a punt. That 4th and 2 play. He's looking for Roman Wilson on an out route into the boundary from the slot. And, Edifon Olafosho able to drive on that ball and break it up. The ball needed to get there a little bit quicker, and ultimately it was broken up. There was a 2nd 10, 42 seconds left in the first half. Back to pass, finds Colson Loveland on a return route, coming open over the middle, hits him in stride, takes him down the middle of the field for a 19-yard gain. So we saw his ability to find the open man, extend some plays. There's a throw on the outside to Cornelius Johnson on an out route for a gain of 7 yards. But ultimately forced Michigan to call a timeout because Johnson wasn't able to get outside. He put the ball a little to the inside, which then gave Elijah Jackson time to drive on the ball and wrap him up. Didn't really allow Cornelius Johnson that momentum going towards the sideline. He put the ball to the inside, so that ball placement, again, coming into play on the short to intermediate routes, not always putting the ball where his receivers needed it. And then 16 seconds left, 3rd and 3, backed up as pressure came in his face, off his back foot, sailed the throw to Johnson to the boundary up the field. Really a poor throw. Throwing off that back foot, as I mentioned. I thought one of the biggest plays, from the Michigan 9-yard line there in the second half. 3rd and 8, middle of the field opens up, gets downhill, showed tremendous speed, split the safeties at the second level, picks up 22 yards. Next play, zone read, follows his tight end Loveland, able to get outside for a gain of 11 yards. 40 carries for first down, mostly in the Big Ten by a quarterback. So it's one of those things, I think they even talked about on the broadcast, bootleg, he's rolling out to his right, patient, waiting for Michelle Powell, the nickel, to commit to either the deeper receiver or Roman Wilson underneath. When he drops, he then hits Roman Wilson, didn't panic, didn't rush the throw, waited for that defender to commit before ultimately making the throw. The biggest throw was a 41-yard gain to Colson Loveland. Ran a dig route. Ball was out just after the cut with Dominique Hampton coming downhill. Tight end runs away from everyone for a big gain. So there were some splash plays, but he was hitting open receivers. And when he was under pressure, when he was in even some of those completions, those 10 completions, ball placement was an issue on some of those, on the short to intermediate routes, some easy throws, and he just kind of left it where the receivers kind of bailed him out a little bit. And the speed, the athleticism, they're absolutely on display. But for me, if I'm an NFL team, NFL franchise, and I'm looking at who's going to be the face of my franchise, and really considering that, you're going to take that guy in round number 1. Is JJ McCarthy one of those guys? I'm not taking him in the top 10. But even looking at, if I'm a team that's sitting there in the middle to the end of round 1, is JJ, there are just too many question marks for me to say JJ McCarthy is absolutely a first round pick. I may change my tune there, but it's one of those things to where I need to go back and I need to watch all the film, and really watch all 22 and study JJ McCarthy and really get a better feel for how he's seeing the field. Because, watching the games live, watching what he's done, or what he hasn't done, it leaves a lot of question marks for me. And so that's why I look at Michael Penix Jr., I look at Bo Nix. They understand where to go with the football. Those are two guys that were basically cornerstones of their team, and they're older prospects. And that's the one thing that JJ McCarthy has that neither of those guys have, is the benefit of some time. He's a much younger quarterback, and so there's a lot more time for teams to work with him. But does that mean you're going to take him in round 1? I honestly think early round 2 is where JJ McCarthy should go. But there are so many teams that need a quarterback either right now or will need one soon, that they're going to be eyeing a quarterback very early in this draft. Like I said, I haven't seen enough out of JJ McCarthy to say he should be a first rounder. Does he have the talent? Absolutely. I would have loved to have seen him on another team that basically the offense went through him. And the thing with it is even if they're a running team, at the end of the day, if you've got a quarterback who is that dynamic, you still find a way to put the football in his hands when it counts. And we just didn't see that. Blake Corum, the running back, 21 carries, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was the offensive MVP in this game. And you saw the patience, you saw his ability to follow his blockers, whether it was Darius Henderson, Max Bredesen, the vision to see the holes. He sets up his blocks really well. Then the quick lateral cuts. He's back to his former self. That speed before the knee injury, the agility, the lateral cuts are absolutely there. And then, like I said, the speed. He was at his own 21, last play of the first quarter. O-line creates a huge hole up the middle, shows the burst from the right side of the line, cuts it to the outside, beats the angle that was taken by the corner, Thaddeus Dixon, gets to the sideline, then after an angle is taken at the UW 30, cuts it back to the inside. Dixon finally drops him at the 20-yard line. It was just one of those things, as you're watching Blake Corum run, you saw the burst is finally getting there. This is a guy that's finally getting back to 100%, and you really absolutely see that. But very decisive. You love the physicality. It drops that pad level, physical finisher, 5'8", 212. They didn't throw the football to him a whole lot. Down the stretch, they didn't really need to. Can Blake Corum be a pass catcher? I think that's something that teams are going to want to see him really catch that football out of the backfield. He caught the ball 56 times. And it's one of those things, the last 2 seasons, just 27. But I will remind you that as a sophomore, he caught 24 passes in 1 season. 7th in the Heisman in 2022, 9th in 2023. I look at Blake Corum. He's a guy that is in my top 5 at the running back spot. I think the running backs, my top 5 is pretty much set. Obviously, I think Trey Benson is one of those guys that's going to be right there. The speed and physicality for a guy that size. Jonathan Brooks at 6 foot 207 is right there as well. Audric Estime, Bucky Irving. Braylon Allen is another guy that is interesting and could very well work his way into my top 5. Estime, number 3, may be a little bit high. I may be adjusting things and moving him down. I just need to go back and take a look at my notes, take a look at some more game film with it. But I think those are really your top 6 in the running back spot, especially with Travion Henderson coming back to Ohio State. That kind of opens things up a little bit. And I think Corum, you get him in there, you're going to see the burst, you're going to see the lateral agility, and he's 5'8". But guys who are 5'8", the smaller running backs, they're still able to get the job done. Corum, when you're looking at running backs, the earliest anyone's going to come off the board is 2nd round. I think Corum is one of those running backs who could hear his name called in round number 3. I think that's probably the earliest that we'll see it called. But I think that's probably where we'll see him come off the board. Roman Wilson, 3 catches for 54 yards. And he was matched up against Jabbar Muhammad for much of the game. And that was one of the things that I was talking about was, Jabbar Muhammad, what he was able to do shutting down Xavier Worthy, I thought was exceptional. Wilson, made that catch underneath, quick burst, speed, getting downhill in a hurry. I think he's one of those guys who's going to be a nice complementary receiver. Could be a late day 2, early day 3 guy. Cornelius Johnson, 3 catches for 25 yards. He's the bigger, more physical receiver. When I look at him, he's not the explosive receiver that, say, a Nico Collins was. I think Cornelius Johnson probably fits in that 5th round, probably somewhere around there. He was able to separate from the safety on a comeback route, adjusted to that ball that I was saying, throwing to the inside, sliding down, makes the catch for a 10-yard gain. Crossing route, I think he was expecting to get hit by Powell and ultimately drops the pass. Cornelius Johnson, to me, he's a good receiver. Wasn't anything spectacular by any means. So 5th round, it could be sooner than that. But I think really with the depth of this receiving core, I think 5th, 6th, could even fall to round 7 possibly. But I think there are a lot of other names that are going to hear their names called, much sooner than Cornelius Johnson. AJ Barner, 6'6", 251. Excellent blocker. I think that's one of the things that you see his ability, like against Iowa in the Big Ten Championship. He's able to create some separation, coming straight down the line, and then able to slip down, haul on a pass in the middle of the zone for a 13-yard gain. Some of that, there's dig route that he ran, widens the corner, then plants, comes across the field, ball was put on him. Ultimately, he did let the ball get into his body, so he's not known as a pass catcher, more so as a blocker, but the route running is something that you do see from him. There was one play, though, that I think really stands out. He pulls across from left to right, meets the linebacker on the outside, kicks him out, and then that ultimately allowed Corum to make Alfonso Tuputala, the inside backer, miss on his cutback to the inside. Again, that lateral agility. 12-yard touchdown, making guys miss in space. A.J. Barner, played a pivotal role there to really kick that guy out on the outside, which then allowed Corum to do his thing in the open field. Barner's going to be a blocker, but look, you look at a guy like Kokieft at Minnesota, not much of a pass catcher at all when he was at Minnesota, right? But he still heard his name called, was drafted in the 6th round, number 218 overall, 6'4", 265, caught 12 passes in his career as a Golden Gopher. He's known as a blocker. And you look at A.J. Barner, 6'6", 245, and 64 catches. Had 22 this year At 42 in his 3 years with the Indiana Hoosiers, I think he's a guy, I look at him, he's a much better pass catcher than Kokieft, but, I think from a blocking standpoint, that's really where his bread is buttered, and I think that's ultimately what you're going to be seeing there with A.J. Barner. The offensive line, I think Trente Jones, I thought I saw that he's going to be at the East-West Shrine game, I believe. You saw the athleticism there. He was making a couple of decent blocks for them up front. Carson Barnhart, though, he played right tackle. I thought he was exposed, especially against Penn State. Chop Robinson having a field day. 6'5", 316. He's played left tackle. He's played right tackle for him, but I think his home really is there at right guard. That's where he kicked inside when Zach Zinner went down. I think he's much better suited inside. He was climbing to the second level, picking off Olafosho, drove him back 5+ yards when they picked up a 15-yard gain. He was leading to his left. Tanufi ultimately beats him, attacking that outside shoulder, got to the quarterback on a sack. But the 46-yard Donovan Edwards run, Latuli Nasanoa drove Ladarius Henderson back into the backfield. Edwards planted, cut the ball back to the right, was able to get under the pad level of Tuatele, and Barnhart gets under that pad level, was trying to shoot the gap to the inside, pinned him to that inside, and allowed Donovan Edwards to ultimately break it to the outside there as well. I think he's a much better guard than he is a tackle. That versatility is going to bode well for Carson Barnhart. I believe he's a senior. Look for Barnhart to be a late day 3 pick. Then you got to go to the pivot, Drake Nugent. This is a guy, look, he's a veteran, played a lot of football, started his career there at Stanford, kicked over to Michigan. Look, 6'1", 305, not the biggest guy by any means, but when you look at Drake Nugent and what he brings to the table, it's a lot of the athleticism, quickness. He's going to have to beat you with a lot of that. Climbs to the second level, gets to Raylan Goforth on that 59-yard run that I talked about from Blake Corum. Created a lane on Corum's cutback after he hit the hole that was created by Trente Jones and Carson Barnhart. Strikes with his hands, turns the linebacker to his left, gets a nice seal block there. Athleticism, that's one of the things that you see there out of that pivot. And when you talk about one of the best in the game who's retiring, Jason Kelsey, here's one of those things that I look at. Arm length, 32.5 inches, not ideal. He's 6'2" and 5'8", so he's taller than Drake Nugent. Weighed in at 280. So, obviously play weight was 295, weighed in at 280. Nugent, 305. The play weight there at Michigan. And, Kelsey ran a 4.89. So that's one of the things that I want to see out of Drake Nugent is what's that 40 time going to be? How quick is he? How agile is he at that center position? Kelsey, think about this. He was drafted in the 6th round, number 191 overall in 2011. Drake Nugent, he's one of those guys. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Jason Kelsey by any means, but you just look at the athleticism, what you see out there on the football field. I think he's one of those guys that is going to probably be in that 6th round range, and I think he's a guy who would have a shot at the next level. Trevor Keegan, another guy there at that guard spot. He's been a veteran presence on that line, one of the better guards in the Big Ten. I thought he had a solid game all really all season long. He's been pretty solid overall. Ladarius Henderson, the left tackle. With Ladarius Henderson, this was a guy that was, I think a lot of people had him on their radar as a top 10 tackle. He's 6'4", 315, going against Braylon Trice. Trice stutters off the ball, caught him leaning to the outside, quick cancel stripe to the inside, gets to McCarthy as he was throwing. You saw the athleticism, pulls on the outside zone to the left, able to latch on to Trice, drove him toward the sideline, opened up a lane for Corum. Ultimately followed that block and the fullback, Bredesen, as I mentioned, climbing to the second level behind him, beating off the ball, but Trice, but was able to recover, getting that right hand on the inside shoulder of Trice and was square to the line of scrimmage as he drove him up the field. Just couldn't recover because of that change in direction. Trice was able to plant as he was past McCarthy and was able to work back to the quarterback who was trying to step up in the pocket. Run play, as I mentioned, with Donovan Edwards, a 41-yard touchdown. Elijah Jackson, the corner in the box, he was able to latch on to him, seal him off to the inside, allowing Edwards to plant, cut to the outside. Had some good leverage on Braylon Trice, who tried an inside move, beat him there, was able to ultimately throw him down and finish the block. You love the physicality. You love a little bit of that nastiness and that mean streak. I just look at Ladarius Henderson. I think he gets beaten way too often on the outside. I look at the physicality. I look at his ability to play in the running game. I ultimately believe he'll be a day 3 guard. I think that's really where he should be. I think he could be a starter at the next level, but I think he really needs to kick inside to guard. I think that's really where his home is going to be. I mentioned Colston Loveland. Had 3 catches for 64 yards. The run after catch, the blocking, especially out on the perimeter for both the running game and for his receivers. Colston Loveland's going to be one of the top tight ends in next year's draft. You can pretty much mark that down. He's a guy that I think definitely stood out in this game. Really was the top pass catcher for the Wolverines in this game. And then when you go to the Washington side of the football, I think my favorite player on this defense is Braylon Trice. One thing I will say before we talk about Braylon is Jabbar Muhammad, the corner. I mentioned Will Johnson being a first rounder. Jabbar Muhammad has been exceptional all season long. He's a little undersized, but he's going to be a guy that I think is going to be talked about as one of the better corners in next year's draft. The question is really going to be, where is he going to be playing next year? Because after moving to Washington from Oklahoma State, with Kalen DeBoer leaving, he's entered the transfer portal. Where is he going to be? But whoever ends up getting him through the portal is going to get a guy who's going to be a starter and a guy that I think will be playing on Sundays and will be a factor in the 2025 draft. But let's get back to Braylon Trice, 6'4", 269, the redshirt junior, only 3 tackles in the game. I wanted to see more consistency from him getting to the quarterback. I thought that Trente Jones and Ladarius Henderson did a pretty good job because he was having to go so wide. He may have had some strength on him, may have had some physicality, but because he can't bend exceptionally well, some of those wide rushes, he wasn't always to be nearly as effective as you wanted him to be. Stutter off the ball, as I mentioned, with Ladarius Henderson. Head fake to the outside, got him leaning. 2-hand swipe, excellent hand usage to that inside shoulder. Got to JJ right as he was delivering that pass to Cornelius Johnson. It was a 7-yard game, but you just love the move. Unable to bend and get a sharper edge to the quarterback. That's something that you saw with Ladarius Henderson being able to recover. Trice beat him off the ball. Henderson turned and really just took his right arm and put it into the inside shoulder and just kind of drove him up the field. Trice, like Aiden Hutchinson, I think about Hutchinson and the fact that he just doesn't quit. He's always working to get to the quarterback, and that's something that I love about Trice is he's durable. He's a guy that doesn't come off the field. He's on out there for virtually every play, and he doesn't give up. He always plays with his hair on fire, and that's something you saw in this game time and time again. He just wasn't able to make the impact that we saw against Texas in the Sugar Bowl. He was beating both Christian Jones and Kelvin Banks like a drum. And really, when he did get the opportunities to rush the passer there with JJ McCarthy, with just 18 pass attempts, there wasn't a ton of activity there. There were times where he'd look to set the edge and he'd lose some of that pad level. I still think Braylon Trice is going to be a first rounder. I think he'll be in the mid to late 20s in the draft, but I think he's got a lot of upside. Like I said, I love the motor. I love the physicality. I just wish that he had a little bit more bend to his game. And then obviously with Edifon Olufosho, you have to talk about the linebacker play there, the inside linebacker. This is a guy who sets the edge, slip inside, drop Blake Corum, and wrap him up around the line of scrimmage. But then he also showed that the blitz coming off the boundary, able to get outside on that flat route to Roman Wilson, covers him on that out from the slot on a 4th and 2, drives on that route, gets his arm in between the wide receiver's hands to break it up. So that's on a wide receiver running an out route, quick out on that 4th and 2 play. You see the cover skills. You see the instincts that's something to me that really jumped out, as I watched him play. He's one of those guys that, at linebacker that people aren't talking about. He'll be at the Senior Bowl. I think that's where you're going to get to see him kind of showcase his skills. 6'1", 235. So he's not the biggest guy by any means, but the cover ability, his ability to set the edge when needed. A guy that's going to be able to play sideline to sideline. He can shoot gaps for you against the run. But that coverage, I keep going back to the coverage. And when you have a guy who has a coverage grade like he does, and making those plays, that's something to me that really stands out. I think that's something that time and time again, Olafosio, and if that's where the game's going, you've got linebackers who can cover. You're going to find a way to get that guy out on the field, and I think you're definitely going to be seeing that with Edifon Olafosio. Now Zion Tupuola-Fatui, this is a guy, once again, who had a great start to his career there for the Huskies. Didn't really get to see the field a ton. He's 6'4", 260, so he's got good size, right? But after 2 years battling injuries, shows up in the 2020 season, only plays in 3 games. Remember, that's the season that was cut short by COVID, but still, 13 tackles, 7 of those were sacks. We're expecting big things from him, right? Only plays in 2 games, gets hurt again in the 2021 season, battling injuries, and then ends up with just 8 sacks over the last 2 seasons. You're waiting for him to make an impact, really be able to take some of that pressure off Braylon Trice, and we just never saw that from him. Wasn't a factor in this game at all. I thought he looked a step slow out there, just wasn't really able to get to the quarterback, just really didn't make an impact. I didn't have him credited for a tackle in this game. So I look at his prospects. If he does get drafted, it'll be late. I think really what you're going to have are some area scouts who know the potential. But man, his injury history, he's a 6-year senior. So obviously age has to be a factor. I wouldn't be surprised if Zion Tupuola-Fatui ends up being an undrafted free agent who has to work his way onto an NFL roster. Just waiting for him to really make an impact down the stretch, and we just didn't see it. And I think that's really the most frustrating thing when you watched him play. Again, I think there was a lot of promise. I think everyone kind of expecting ZTF to have a big year, finally return to that prowess. And we saw it, against Michigan State. The second game of the year, had 2 sacks. Everyone's kind of thinking, okay, he's back. Only other game where he registered a sack was against USC. That was right after his dad passed away. Emotional game, very emotional. Had a sack and a half on Caleb Williams. Ultimately helped propel Washington to that win. 10-point win in the Coliseum. But that was a game that was really in doubt for much of the game. And really, it was 2 heavyweight fighters with Caleb Williams and Michael Penix Jr. trading those blows. And he came up big. And I was hoping that he would finish the season on a high note. And ultimately, there's only 1 game where he had a tackle for loss. It was just a half tackle for loss against the Beavers. And, frankly, just had registered 6 tackles in the final 4 games. And so that's something that I think that the potential is still there. But, it's one of those things to where after being there for 6 years, is he one of those guys, where it's just that unfilled potential because of all of the injuries? Did they catch up to him? Is he a step slow because of that? So I think undrafted free agency is probably where we're going to see him fall. And he's going to have to fight like heck to get onto an NFL roster. So we've talked about when Washington had the football, what they look like on offense, Michigan defensively, and then obviously flip the script. When Michigan had the football, Washington's defense, the draft prospects, what we saw in this game, what that means for their draft stock. Is it something that we saw the entire year? And for some of these guys, yeah, absolutely. Like I said, Drake Nugent, the athleticism. We saw that all year there at that center spot. Carson Barnhart struggled until he kicked inside to guard. I think that's going to be his home. Blake Corum, the lateral agility and the burst, absolutely there. Donovan Edwards, He's back to his former self, apparently. He's the guy that's coming back. I thought that was a great decision, on his part. I think Chris Jenkins, when he's all about speed, man, and put him in there as a 3 technique and let him go to work. Mikey Sainris's still coming up big time and time again. Braylon Trice, a guy that I think can be effective, can get into the backfield. Again, the bend is what you worry about, but there's a lot to like watching his game. And then obviously with Washington, breaking down everything from Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, those 3 receivers. Jack Westover is going to get himself drafted, I think. Troy Fautanu is a first-rounder. Roger Rosengarten. This was a bit of an anomaly, I thought. Did he struggle with speed at times? Sure, but not to this level where it just seemed like he was repeatedly either getting called for a hold or he'd jump off sides trying to get a head start dealing with these guys. And then obviously at that quarterback position, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix Jr., I left this game really convinced that these are 2 quarterbacks that aren't going to be taken in round 1. Will there be one? I think if there is going to be a quarterback taken in round number 1 that's not named Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Jaden Daniels, it will end up being JJ McCarthy, if nothing else because of the potential and his age. I think age is going to be a huge factor because Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, they're both 6-year seniors. So I think they're both, 24, 25 when they hit that rookie season. I think there's still a lot of questions there especially with Michael Penix Jr.'s game. Pressure, doesn't really handle it all that well. Michigan made him look very pedestrian. One game doesn't make or break anyone, but it's one of those things to where it more or less confirmed what I was expecting to see even in that Texas game. I drank the Kool-Aid there with that Texas game, thinking maybe he's finally turned the corner, kind of like C.J. Stroud against Georgia. But then against Michigan, the first time we really saw him against consistent pressure. We saw some of the chinks in the armor in the Texas game with him on the move and trying to make throws, throwing balls behind guys, not really able to hit them. He doesn't set his feet. He struggles. The footwork can be a little iffy as well. The deep ball is absolutely ridiculous, but there's more to the game than just throwing a good deep ball. And I think a lot of those throws, especially, man, can you just take a short drop, find the hot receiver when you're under that pressure and be able to, to flip the script there on the defense. That's something that we wanted to see there in that Michigan game, but really we saw a lot of throws into the flat. We didn't really see him take advantage of any of that. As a processor, understanding where to go with the football, we saw him do that, but can he do it on a consistent basis? We haven't seen it, and that's why I'm not taking Michael Penix in round number 1. I can't. So one thing that I do want to leave you with is kind of a top 10 mock. Just kind of looking at things once again before we go ahead and wrap things up with this podcast. We look at number 1 overall, Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams, I think, is going to be the pick here until otherwise, because we don't know what's happening with Justin Fields. If Justin Fields is the pick, we can kind of go through that as well. But for the Bears, but Caleb Williams there at number 1 as of right now. Drake May going number 2 overall to Washington. Again, if Caleb Williams is not the guy for Chicago, I think you trade with Washington. If I'm Washington, I'm looking for a new identity with this team. Ron Rivera fired as the head coach. I'm looking at bringing in the kid from Washington, D.C. to rejuvenate my franchise. I trade up to the number 1 overall pick. Chicago can then get Marvin Harrison Jr. Imagine Marvin Harrison Jr. and DJ Moore for Justin Fields. If Fields is going to be your guy, that could very well be the move. Drake May, otherwise, going number 2 overall to Washington. Sitting there at number 3, the Patriots, they're in a good position. If the 2 quarterbacks are off the board, then it's Jaden Daniels. If not, then I think Drake May ends up going number 3 overall. Sitting there at number 4, the Cardinals. Marvin Harrison Jr. is still on the board. He'll be the pick there at number 4. I think there's no question about that. They need a number 1 for Kyler Murray. If Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up going to the Bears, let's say at number 2, then I think this pick will end up being Malik Neighbors. I think you have to get out of here with the number one. It could be Odunze as well. It just depends on the flavor, who they like. Here, I think the explosiveness of Malik Neighbors, though, would be a nice fit in Arizona. Number 5, the Chargers. I think regardless of what happens in the top 4, could they decide to go after a receiver? Maybe. But I think Brock Bowers, especially with Gerald Everett, a free agent, they need to get some weapons for Justin Herbert, and I think they can still get receivers in free agency. But Brock Bowers is one of those tight ends that you just can't pass up on. The Giants sitting there at number 6. This is where I think they finally need to get quality over quantity. Sometimes that's the way you should be looking at it. They've so many receivers on this roster. They need a number 1. They're lacking one right now. Malik Neighbors will be the guy. If he's off the board going to the Cardinals at 4, then I think Odunze becomes that pick there at number 6 overall. Number 7, the Titans. Here's an interesting pick. The Titans, they need a receiver for Will Levis. Could they go receiver here? I think this is a team that's going to be looking for receivers in free agency as well. That could be an option. If Odunze is sitting there, that could be the pick. It's a deep receiver draft, so they can always look to pick up a receiver in round 2. That's why I think Olu Fashanu, get that left tackle. Will Levis was getting beat up left and right. They need to take care of him. Olu Fashanu, they're at number 7. Then you go to number 8, and the Atlanta Falcons. Here's the team that, if Jaden Daniels is still available, he's going to be the pick there at number 8. Only way that he's available is if Caleb Williams goes to Washington and then Drake May ends up going to the Patriots, right? Because Justin Fields remains with the Bears. So if that happens, Atlanta probably looks to try to trade up and get Jaden Daniels. If they sit there at number 8 and Williams, May, and Daniels are all off the board, I think they go with the best edge rusher. The most complete edge rusher for me is Laiatu Latu out of UCLA. There's no doubt about that. Could they go Dallas Turner? Sure. But Laiatu Latu, come on. You see the speed, you see the power, you see the hand usage, you see his ability to bend. He does everything well coming off the edge there for UCLA. Most consistent edge rusher. The win rate is phenomenal. To me, I look at Latu. I think he's a no-brainer for them. If Atlanta can't get their quarterback, I think Atlanta really needs to get a quarterback. I mean, you look at that offense. Offensive line is set. You've got a Pro Bowler in Chris Lindstrom at left guard. You've got your right tackle Caleb McGarry's there for a while. You've got Jake Matthews as well. I think Matt Hennessy is playing center. The right guard spot I want to say is also solid. Kyle Pitts at tight end. Drake London at receiver. They're going to need to fill in additional receivers as well. But you got Bijan and Tyler Algier there at running back. They're a quarterback away from that offense really clicking and firing on all cylinders. Desmond Ridder proved that he can't be the guy. And Taylor Heineke, look, he's a nice spot starter. He's a nice backup to have, but he's not a starter. So Atlanta needs to figure out that quarterback position. Look, if the Bears, if they are going to stay at number 1, I look at talking about Justin Fields. Why not? See if you can bring in Justin Fields. It's probably going to cost you a second or third. You're not going to be getting that number 8 overall pick. So you can stay there, get the defensive player that you need, and get a quarterback. That's always an option there as well. So the Bears sitting there at number 9. If they go Caleb Williams, then I think if Odunze is on the board, that's the route you go. Add weapons for your quarterback, right? DJ Moore, Odunze. Now you've got weapons. And if it's Caleb Williams who's your quarterback, then you give him 2 bona fide studs on the outside to deliver the football to. Then you have a tight end in Cole Kmet as well. I think you really start building a nice passing attack there. If ultimately Caleb Williams is not the pick there at number 1, they trade the pick and for the Bears, and Caleb ends up going 1 to Washington. The Bears trade down to number 2, and they end up taking Marvin Harrison Jr. Then I think ultimately at 9 you get an edge rusher. You get somebody to pair with Montez Sweat. I think you're going to want to try to get Latu. If not, then Dallas Turner's the guy. I think the other option could potentially be Joe Alt. If you're not sold on Braxton Jones at left tackle, then Joe Alt can also be that option. Obviously, you have Darnell Wright at right tackle. Looks like he's going to be a keeper there. Joe Alt, protect your investment there at the quarterback position. Just saying, that could be a possibility. And then sitting there at number 10 overall, the New York Jets. That's where Joe Alt ends up coming off the board. He and Fautanu, if Fautanu ends up not coming off the board on at number 7 to the Titans, and that's where Alt lands, then Fautanu will end up coming off the board there. They've got to make sure that they're protecting the quarterback at all times. Whether it was Aaron Rodgers, obviously going down first game of the year, Zach Wilson, it didn't matter who was that quarterback. Pressure, coming, sacks, you don't want to have to deal with all of that. So I think at the end of the day there, Joe Alt ends up being the guy. And what's interesting is, the Vikings, they're sitting there at number 11. Could Michael Penix Jr. be the answer there? I just got through saying Michael Penix Jr. is not a first rounder, but the Vikings really are another team that need a quarterback. Kirk Cousins, is he going to be back from the injury in time for the season? They tried with Josh Dobbs. At the end of the day, they're going to need a quarterback for the future. And Penix, I think you could probably wait until the second round, but I just don't think that's going to happen. Minnesota is desperate for a quarterback, and so unless they try to make a trade, they try to get Jaden Daniels, I think Michael Penix Jr. may not have a choice but to take him and get him on your field. And, hey, doesn't really have to change colors, the purple and gold, right? I think there's still a possibility that Penix ends up going much higher off the board than he should. I think he's a guy that should be a top 50 pick. I don't think he's a first rounder, but Minnesota may not have a choice. They may not be able to make that decision. I think they'll end up having to pull the trigger and take a quarterback at number 11 overall, or try to move into the top 10 and get a quarterback. You have to move ahead of Atlanta to be able to do that. I think you're going to have to really look at teams. Are there teams that are going to be willing to move down to number 11 out of that top 10? And frankly, I just don't see it happening. So I think there's really going to be a lot of discussion over the next few months with Michael Penix Jr. Is he truly the number 4 quarterback? I think he's probably the guy, he and Bo Nix, but I don't see either of them as first-round quarterbacks. So I think Minnesota, like I said, may not have a choice, though. They may not have a choice in the matter. That may end up having to be the guy that they end up pulling the trigger on. They're sitting at number 11 overall. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, the mocks are going to change quite a bit as we lead up to the draft. We don't even have the entire first round set just yet. That won't actually happen until after the Super Bowl is played next month. But you can guarantee that I'll be here every step of the way, covering every bit of the pre-draft process, from the All-Star games to the Combine, discussing individual workåuts, taking a look at free agency, what's happening there, what are the team needs, and who's going to be the best fit for a lot of these teams. And I'll go to work, put together my mock drafts. Not only am I looking at the first round or day 2, I'm also looking at day 3. Who are going to be the guys that are going to end up making an impact? Who's going to be the Puka Nacua? Puka Nacua, a 5th round receiver, ends up breaking records, rookie receiving records, and just the things that he's been able to do there for the Rams, especially with Cooper Kupp going down. Who's going to be that guy? The guy that kind of comes out of nowhere. A guy that I think everybody was expecting to make an impact, but not to that level, not record-breaking levels. I don't think anybody saw that coming. And that's something that I think is really cool about the draft process, is there can be guys that you'll find that are just diamonds in the rough. I mean, the guy ran a 4.57 at 6'1", 201, but the dude is so tough. He's physical, and frankly, I thought he was a nice receiver at BYU, but I looked at him as a day 3 guy. I thought he was a nice complimentary pick. Did not see him being an alpha at the next level. I thought he could make an impact, but not that type of impact. So as we go through the draft, obviously this is a copycat league. Teams are going to be looking for who can be that next Puka Nacua. We'll be taking a look at that. We'll be taking a look at who are those diamonds in the rough, who are the guys that are overrated, who are the guys flying under the radar, who are some of the small school guys that we need to take a look at as well, who are going to get themselves drafted. It's crazy. You're going to see a guy from South Dakota State, the running back, Isaiah Davis, get taken on day 3, and you might see an offensive tackle from Yale. Yeah, that's right, Yale, Ivy League, potentially get drafted before day 2 is out. So again, a lot to cover. Hopefully you've enjoyed the content so far. We'll be running this back all the way up until the draft kicks off end of April. Hope you stick around and enjoy the party. Until next time, for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Enjoy the rest of your week, everyone. And until next time, I am out of here.